On a muggy June evening in 24, the neighborhood of Wrenswood in Charleston, South Carolina, was cloaked in an oppressive stillness. The streets, lined with neatly kept homes and manicured lawns, seemed untouched by turmoil. But at the very end of a cul-de-sac stood the Robinson Spiller house, a glaring exception. Its paint peeled from the walls, weeds overran the garden, and the windows were grimy with neglect. The house looked as though it had absorbed the tension brewing within. William Spiller, 48, was a towering, heavy-set man with a gruff demeanor. His only son, Nathan Robinson, was 28, a pale, withdrawn figure consumed by his love for mathematics and the quiet rhythm of numbers. Their relationship was strained at best, poisoned by William's constant ridicule of his son's lack of ambition. Everything came to a head when Nathan discovered a devastating betrayal. Years earlier, his father had taken out a loan in Nathan's name, a debt William now refused to repay. It was a weight that had crushed Nathan's credit, trapping him in financial ruin. Their arguments became louder, harsher, with Nathan's voice trembling under the force of William's booming shouts. But that June evening, after one final explosive fight, the house was eerily quiet. The days that followed were unnervingly normal, at least on the surface. William went about his days in the living room, glued to the TV, beer in hand, ignoring Nathan entirely. Nathan, meanwhile, withdrew into himself, his mind spiraling into an abyss of cold, calculating thoughts. He had always been methodical. Now that trait turned sinister. One night, Nathan made his decision. While his father dozed in his recliner, the television humming in the background, Nathan approached, a kitchen knife glinting in his hand. The act was swift, brutal, and irrevocable. Yet it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Nathan's precision took over. He retrieved a power saw from the basement and set to work dismembering his father's body. It was an arduous task. William had been a large man, weighing nearly 30 pounds. Each piece was carefully packed into plastic storage containers, bought in preparation for this grim task. The largest container, housing William's torso, was covered with a cloth and repurposed as a TV stand in the very living room where he had spent his final moments. For weeks, Nathan carried on as though nothing had happened. He answered text messages on his father's phone, maintaining the illusion that William was alive and away visiting relatives in Florida. When nosy neighbors asked about the patriarch's absence, Nathan offered convincing excuses, his voice steady despite the lies. But the facade began to crumble. A foul odor began seeping through the walls, impossible to mask, despite Nathan's desperate attempts with air fresheners. Then, one day, the neighbor downstairs, Daniel Hawthorne, noticed something strange. A watery, pinkish fluid dripping from his kitchen ceiling. Assuming it was a plumbing issue, Daniel contacted the building manager, who, upon investigation, found the source far more disturbing. There were reddish stains seeping through the floorboards of Nathan's apartment. The police were called immediately. When officers knocked on Nathan's door, he greeted them with an unnervingly calm demeanor. The stench inside the apartment, however, told a different story. It didn't take long for the police to uncover the horrors within. The basement revealed the first clues: bloodstains and saw marks on the floor. Upstairs, the investigators were drawn to the living room, where they found the makeshift TV stand. Beneath the cloth was the plastic container housing William's torso. More containers were discovered in the basement, each meticulously labeled and stored. The tools of the crime, knives, saws, and bloodied rags, lay discarded nearby. Nathan was arrested on the spot. During his interrogation, he showed no remorse. Instead, he spoke in detached terms, describing his actions as though solving a mathematical problem. "It was logical," he said, "a solution to an unsolvable equation." As investigators delved deeper, they stumbled upon a chilling discovery on Nathan's laptop, a journal encrypted with complex algorithms. When cracked, its contents painted a portrait of a deeply disturbed mind. Nathan had documented his frustrations with his father in detail, but he also revealed a bizarre, calculated plan to transform the tragedy into something eternal. He believed that by dismembering and repurposing the body, he could defy the laws of nature and leave a lasting legacy. The journal also referenced a final masterpiece, though the details were vague. Weeks later, a chilling clue arrived. A newspaper clipping slid under Daniel Hawthorne's door. The article described a similar crime in 1970, where a man had turned his wife's remains into furniture. Nathan, it seemed, was not only seeking personal justice, but also trying to emulate infamous crimes in a bid for recognition. Nathan's trial was a spectacle. The defense argued that he was insane, driven by a fractured psyche. The prosecution countered, painting him as a cold, calculating killer who meticulously planned his father's murder. Expert witnesses debated whether Nathan was a genius lost in his own mind or a sociopath devoid of empathy. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. After hours of deliberation, the jury found Nathan guilty of first-degree murder with extreme cruelty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As the sentence was read, Nathan's face remained expressionless. The Robinson Spiller house was abandoned and quickly fell into ruin. Neighborhood kids whispered about it being haunted, claiming to hear faint voices or smell something rotten as they passed by. Eventually, the property was demolished, but the story lingered in Wrenswood like a ghost. Nathan now spends his days in a high-security prison, filling notebooks with equations and theories no one will ever read. He finds solace in the logic of numbers, even as the world outside remembers him not as a misunderstood genius, but as the architect of one of Charleston's most gruesome crimes.